You weren't supposed to notice. You weren't supposed to question the room you were born in, the one that told you who to be, what to feel, what not to say. But something cracked. A glance that didn't match the words. A silence that screamed louder than the noise. A moment that whispered, "This is not the truth." You brushed it off. The first time, the second time, you swallowed it. But on the third time, something inside you flinched. And that flinch, that tiny rebellion, was the beginning of your awakening. But not everyone celebrated it. They smiled, but only as long as you stayed asleep. We'll return to that smile. What if I told you your entire life was structured like a bedtime story? Clean, predictable, reassuring. Except you weren't the author. You weren't even the main character. You were a theme, a moral, a function. You learned to cry at the right times, smile on cue, shrink your thoughts down to something palatable. So they keep feeding you love. You weren't raised. You were rehearsed. But what if the moment you broke the script was the first time you actually existed? We'll come back to that too. They praised you for how quiet you were, for how grateful, for how easy to love. But what they meant was, you're easy to manage. You performed love. You performed peace. You performed wholeness. But under the performance, you were screaming, "Tell me." Who taught you that love means disappearing? Who convinced you that wholeness was dangerous? You thought if you showed your fear, they'd soothe it. But the moment you did, they handed you silence. We'll talk about that silence soon. Here's the part they don't tell you. Waking up doesn't feel powerful. It feels like grief. It feels like loss. It feels like watching your childhood burn down in slow motion. Because the moment you awaken is the moment you realize they never loved the real you. Only the version that played along. Only the smile you wore to keep the peace. Only the silence that kept their world intact. You didn't just lose people when you woke up. You lost the illusion they ever saw you to begin with. And that illusion, it kept you alive for years. You mourned them. But more than that, you mourned the self you abandoned to stay in their story. We'll return to that graveyard later. You were trained, before you even had words, rewarded for obedience, punished for curiosity, taught to trade your instincts for approval, and your boundaries for belonging. And so you became what the room needed, even if it shattered you. Do you remember it, that first time you said no, and watched their face change? The first time your need was too much. The first time you were shamed for your sadness. You weren't dramatic. You were awake. You weren't rebellious. You were real. But they didn't want real. They wanted regulation. They wanted control wrapped in your smile. The part of you that learned this is still waiting to be untrained. Let's talk about that next. You became the safe space. In rooms that shattered you, you became the calm. In storms you never created, you became the apology for pain that was never yours. Do you understand what that does to a soul? When you contort yourself to be digestible, you don't just lose your voice. You lose your reflection. You lose your hunger. You lose your fire. And then one day, you wake up. But everything inside you is still sedated. That's what they wanted. A you that functions, not a you that feels. But here's the part you never saw coming. Functioning isn't freedom, and peace is not the same thing as numbness. We'll come back to that distinction soon. Here's the trap. The more you wake up, the more they'll say you're changing, not in awe, in accusation. They'll call it selfish. That you have boundaries now, they'll call it distant. That you don't overextend, they'll call it rude. That you stopped apologizing for your aliveness, but they never called it love when you were drowning in their needs. And now, you're the villain for choosing air. This is what awakening really looks like. Not spiritual bliss, but losing people who only like the sedated version of you. But we'll talk about villains soon. You don't just wake up and walk away. You limp, you shake, you cry in silence because no one understands this loss. Because the thing you're mourning wasn't real. It was a construct. a version of yourself built to be digestible. And you loved them with that version. You built futures with that version. You found purpose in being needed, even if it meant bleeding quietly beneath their praise. And now, you see it clearly. You weren't loved. You were useful. You weren't accepted. You were tolerated. And it cuts, because even the lie gave you warmth once. But warmth isn't truth, and comfort isn't safety. The real you is waiting beneath the ashes, and she's still breathing. We'll return to her in a moment. You thought love would save you, that one day someone would see you, hold your chaos gently, choose your scars, and finally stay. But what if love isn't what you were taught it was? What if love doesn't fix you, but invites your wounds into the room without fear? What if the right love feels quiet, not explosive, not conditional, not a war you have to win? You've been taught to chase the drama because peace felt too empty. But maybe that emptiness was space. Space for the first real version of you to exist. Hold on to that idea, because we're not done waking her up. There's a version of you, still hiding behind the couch. Small hands clenched, ears listening for the next explosion that never came. A child who learned early that survival means disappearance, that peace means silence, that being too loud, too emotional, too you was dangerous. And so they locked their voice in a box called Be Good. Don't cry, don't ruin this. But you hear them now, the child inside you calling through the cracks. Not for revenge, not even for healing, but for a chance to be real. Finally, hold that voice. We're going to answer it. They'll tell you, you've changed. Let them. You're not here to make people comfortable. You're not here to shrink so others don't drown in their own unresolved chaos. You are not a mirror for their illusions. You are not the caretaker of their peace while yours bleeds silently. And no, you're not bitter. You're just done. Done explaining your boundaries. Done being soft for people who treat softness like a weakness. Done setting yourself on fire just to be seen. Your awakening is not a phase. It's a return. And they don't have to understand it. You do. They needed you asleep, because the real you breaks cycles. The real you dismantles lies. The real you doesn't beg for permission to exist. And yes, they will call it arrogance. But let them. You're not seeking applause anymore. You're seeking authenticity. You're not waiting for the world to love you whole. You're loving yourself despite its fracture. You don't need saving. You need remembering. And every time you say no to what broke you, you become the person you were always meant to be. Not perfect, but real. Not polished, but whole. Not asleep, but terrifyingly awake. And if you made it this far, it means you're waking up too. It means the costume doesn't fit anymore. It means the silence isn't protecting you. It's burying you. Here, we don't tell you to smile. We don't tell you to shrink. We don't tell you to be positive. We hold space for the mess, for the grief, for the resurrection. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not crazy. You are remembering that who you had to be is not who you have to stay. Here, we wake up, we burn the scripts, we rebuild from ash, and we do it together. So stay with us, share your silence, speak your storm, and keep returning to what's real. Stay awake, stay sovereign, stay deep.